What is going on, Dominators? Rico Garcia here. If you have ever thought about chasing a storm, if you've thought about mobilizing to a disaster area, this episode is going to be one that you do not want to miss. Today, we're going to be joined by Ken Siders, and I've been trying to get this individual on the podcast here for about a year, but he's just obviously an extremely busy guy. Finally, we're able to go ahead and get him on the show, and I first got to meet Ken over at an event here in Florida called Winter Break. And he was giving this speech about everything that you need and how to properly prepare in order to mobilize. And it was one of these things where he had so much attention to detail that I was like, man, I wish that more people would genuinely understand everything that's involved before they go out and mobilize. So in this particular episode, we're going to cover all bases on if you are going to mobilize for a storm, if you have thought about it, what you should be aware of, some things that typically people forget about, and also some of the dynamics here in the Florida area with this last hurricane that we just had, and what we could do to learn from what's happening in this particular landscape and how that's affecting contractors. So this is a really exciting interview that we did with Ken. He's a very insightful individual, and I hope that you enjoy the podcast. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Let's go.
Welcome to the Restoration Domination Podcast, where you learn actionable advice that moves the needle and helps service-based businesses dominate. Here's your host, Rico Garcia Jr.
All right. What is going on, my Dominators? This is going to be an exciting one. I've been actually looking forward to this particular podcast, this interview, for about a year, maybe a little bit more than a year at this point. So, hey, Ken, welcome to the show. Are you ready to help us dominate?
I'm ready.
All right. Awesome. Cool. So do me a favor, man, just fill in some of the gaps on my intro. Let everybody know exactly who you are and what it is that you do for those few that may not be familiar with who you are.
Sure. So my name's Ken Siders, and I run a company called Environmental Testing and Assessments. I'm a third-party assessor, and my job in the storm chasing industry is to assess buildings, to write protocols for remediation/mitigation, and then to monitor these particular projects to the end, and hopefully at some point give them clearance so that they can rebuild.
That's awesome. So one of the things, and one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on was because I saw you at, I saw you have a presentation at Winter Break, I believe it was, and you were talking about hurricane preparedness, right? Like on the contractor side, like what it is that we need in order to have not only mentally, right, but also in our toolkit before we start dispatching and before we start, packing up all of our tools and packing up all of our guys. And the degree to which you had broken everything down was something that I said, man, more people need to be made aware of this, because there are a lot of horror stories of good quality contractors that have all the best intentions in the world, that have a pretty decent business, but then they go out, they chase their first storm, and they get crushed. And it's very, very difficult to recover it because simply you didn't take the initial steps. So let's start there, right? Like kind of walk us through, and then we'll start expanding on the story. Kind of walk us through, some of your experiences with going out to disaster situations, chasing storms, and how to properly prepare yourself, or how you prepare yourself when you're about to dispatch.
Sure. So it begins way before the storm. I'd mentioned to you one time, I'm an old scoutmaster, retired, and so prepare. So before the storm, way before the storm, we have a storm kit that we go through. That kit has certain items in it. They're all listed in their own tubs or cases, or whatever the case may be. These things are going to include simple items like tools of our trade, also include first aid kits, PPE, steel-toed boots, safety glasses, gloves, just simple things that you wouldn't perhaps think you might need. Chainsaw, satellite phone, radio for communication, 2 types of cell phones, one for one network and one for the other, because you never know which one's going to be down.
Right.
And then we have a plan. We're going to roll into this disaster zone. Our business model is actually to bring our own housing because that's such an issue when you get there. Even if you do find a place to live, it's always been my feeling that you're taking something away from a local who needs that place. So we roll in with our own, like we're in a mobile office right now, our own mobile office with sleeping quarters, and we set up on what we call an anchor job. So that'd be the first commercial job that we're on. We need a place that we can anchor. From there, we can begin to market and help other companies. So all of this preparation is in place long before a storm happens. And even though I may have checked all this, or my people may have checked all this, when we put it away from the last storm, we're going to check it again when we take it out for the next storm. I want to be sure that simple things like the MREs are in date, that we have enough water, that things got put away and properly oiled so they're not an issue when we need them, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So let's talk about the anchor job, right? So let's assume for a second that you have, and actually, let's not do that, right? Because I feel like that's still putting the cart in front of the horse. Let's talk about a little bit more in depth about some of the tools, right? Because a lot of restoration contractors are like, well, hey, I've got my trailer and I can pretty much handle any job at any moment, on a whim, and we're ready to go, right? But there are some unique differences when you're going to dispatch, right? So let's dig a little bit deeper into the toolkit, right? And why exactly it's important for us to have these kind of tools. I mean, I'm in Florida, East Coast, and I could tell you firsthand that the amount of people that had a sat phone, out on the West Coast was like 0.01%. I mean, it was almost nobody, right? And there was a lot of contractors that were out there that really just didn't have any communication in, first couple of days. So, talk to us about the toolkit and the importance and why a restoration contractor really needs to pay a little bit more attention than they think they do, because again, they're going to be traveling, right? So let's talk about that.
So self-contained is a word that I like to use for that. When you go into a disaster area, whether it's something huge like Hurricane Michael 6 years ago, which by the way was in my hometown, when you go into a disaster area like that, you carry in a mindset generally that things are going to be difficult, but oftentimes people don't take into account that those difficulties include simple things like your cell phone no longer works. It works, but the towers are down. So it may be a week or two sometimes before the temps get in. So how do you communicate? Well, a satellite phone is cheap. It's certainly cheap compared to not getting a job when you might have the ability to get a job. So let's say
Right.
you spend $500 on a satellite phone, you buy a few minutes and you don't use it. No harm, no foul. Most of us have a tool that costs $500. And this one can seriously make you some money. Not to mention that in communications, we have a habit of never having our office staff in the disaster zone. We found that the stress and that the confusion that causes on them is not worth it. And so they'll be remote every time, whether it's from one of our offices in Louisiana or Texas or wherever we happen to be. That's where our support staff will be. We need communication with them every day. They have to understand what we're doing, how to bill, who to reach out to, because they have full communication. And then it comes down to the site communication. We predominantly do commercial jobs. So in a commercial job, multi-story, we'll say we have a 9 or 10-story building. And let's say that in our crew, we're running 6 to 8 people. Well, my job is to keep the chaos down. If you have 6 to 8 people on a job site on a multi-story building, which sometimes doesn't have power, so you're going up and down the stairs, it's not just important, it's imperative that you have communication. So we have the ability to have the radios that we have. We'll have a supervisor channel, and then we'll have an all band, if you will, where everyone hears what you're saying. And so we communicate like that. When I roll up on a job, I turn the supervisor channel on, check in with my supers, and then go to the all band, talk to people, visit the site, make sure things are being done correctly. If you couldn't do that, if you didn't know where people were in the site, it would take you hours as opposed to having simple, inexpensive communication. It'll take you moments. So that's one of the reasons that we do that.
I love that. Any gear recommendations or any brands that you've found over the years are trustworthy, that they just don't break down, or that you would recommend to for people to look into?
So Motorola, in my opinion, makes the best radio that's suited for that. Although we've used quite a few. We use Baofangs sometimes, and then we've had a couple of, I forget the other brand, but you're going to get what you pay for. If you pay $100 for the radio, then it's going to be a fairly decent radio. If you pay $250 for it, you're probably not going to replace it anytime soon. But when you need 12 to 15 of these things, then it's cost benefit.
Right. Cool. So now we've got our communication down. Any other major tools that people often overlook, as far as, when they're about to dispatch or when they're already on site? Have you seen or heard of any one common mistake where it's like, oh man, this was a quick oversight and I should have had this and now I need it?
It's going to seem so simple, but a place to make notes. So I have an iPad that I carry that has the lanyard and the back handle. And so that's like a second arm to me. I can have that around my neck. It never bothers me. I need to take notes or whatever the case may be. If I have service, I can, of course, do email. I would say a ruggedized iPad is very important. At the very least, have a notepad and have the ability to take notes. Things get a bit chaotic in these situations, and you're going to want to write down people's phone numbers. Perhaps they don't have a card and the phone's not working. Well, you may need the head building inspector's phone numbers once the service gets back up. But if you don't have a way to put that down or keep that in some way, you're not going to be able to work effectively.
That totally makes sense, right? Like and again, it's with the way that technology is today, like really taking advantage of the tools that are already out there to kind of make your life a little bit easier, right? Like I literally walk around everywhere all the time with my iPad. Like usually my iPad is always at arm's length, whether I'm on a job site or not, just because at this point they're not so cumbersome. Right. And it literally has every single tool, at least from a tech standpoint, that you could possibly ever need. So now that we've got our toolkit set up, we've prepared, we are self-contained, as you say. Now we're dispatching. Let's talk about timing, because the timing was something that was so important. Do we want to show up prior to the storm being hit? Do we want to show up the day after? Like, is there a sweet spot? Is there a recommendation? I know that there's a lot of people, a lot of contractors that they're like, well, I want to be first boots on the ground because I just want to get the lion's share of what's going on. And whatever, we could argue the logic on that, right? But, talk to me about timing and what you personally have found over the years to have been what works for you.
So I've done all of those things. I've been way ahead of the storm, picked a spot that I knew the storm was going to hit. I've come directly after the storm. I definitely don't recommend that. And I've come a week after the storm or a few days after the storm. There are a lot of people who have very strong opinions about all three of those. I have seen all of them work out in that being there allows you to, especially if they bring the National Guard in and restrict access, it allows you to be on site. Hopefully you are self-contained so that you don't have to leave because you might not come back. They might not let you in the area again. And you can begin to sell like that. That's one thing. Then there's the come directly after the storm. The issues with that particular mode of timing is that you're going to find yourself in long lines of traffic, and there are going to be access issues. So I don't personally prefer that one. Then there is the come a week or 3 or 4 days after. There's generally a dead time right after a storm, and that's when people are coming out of their homes and they're walking around seeing what's destroyed. They go check on their businesses, and so there's not a lot of business being conducted 2 or 3 days directly after a storm. But then there is a sweet spot, and in my opinion, that's 4 or 5 days after a storm all the way up to a couple of months, in that you have fairly predictable range of asset owners coming in fairly predictable times, i.e. if you have an asset owner of, say, a large home, which might even be considered a commercial project, they're most likely going to have their house manager take a look at that, and they're going to report back to them. And so they're going to begin to understand that they have damage. The first thing that we need people to understand is that they do have damage. If they don't think they have damage, then they won't want either my services or a restoration contractor's services. So pointing that out, especially when you can get access to a decision maker, is key in getting the project.
That totally makes sense. So again, and I guess there is no right or wrong answer. It's just, but there is the point that I think people need to consider about convenience, just overall convenience. When is it going to save you as much mental bandwidth about, being and showing up at, this disaster site, right? Because again, if you show up at the wrong time and you're having trouble getting in or getting out from the location, then that can be really stressful. So also pertaining to how many people you take with you, right? And how much gear you're taking with you. Let's talk about paperwork, because I remember you speaking about having documentation, having paperwork about you, your company, and what you're actually at that disaster area to do. What kind of paperwork should people constantly have on them, especially in the beginning of the storm or the beginning of, mobilizing to an area to let local law enforcement officials know why exactly it is that you're there?
So technically, what we are when we respond to a storm are second responders. And there are statutes, at least in the state of Florida, that allow for second responders to go into disaster zones. So I don't have the chapter and verse, but that's out there on the internet. We carry that statute with us in a small placard that's on our window to identify ourselves. Everyone in our company has a badge that they must wear. We're big on badges. And these badges not only identify us by name and what we do, they have a they have a QR code that can be scanned by any normal phone. It'll bring up information about the person and the company that allows us to prove who we are. And then we also, in regards to licensure and insurance, we carry that with us because that's something that'll be asked at some point by a customer or perhaps even an official. So that's important. And then just simple uniforms. I can't stress enough that your customer's perception is your reality. So if you show up dressed in a branded uniform with an ID and you are professional, you have on proper boots, and you're purporting yourself properly, then you're going to be perceived as a professional. If you show up in tennis shoes and shorts and you have business cards, then you're going to be perceived as a carpetbagger. That's just the bottom line. And when we say the customer's perception is our reality, the truth of the matter is, it's not just the customers. When you interact with law enforcement, whether it's local law enforcement or it's National Guard or whatever the case is, these people are in a state of emergency themselves. And so if they perceive you as being a professional, most likely that they're going to thank you for being there. If they perceive you as confused, disorganized, junk in the back of your truck, then you're going to be treated accordingly.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense, right? And I think that for anybody who's been on any kind of hurricane, disaster cleanup type of situation, like you've seen the trucks, you've seen the people that show up, right? And to some degree, kind of playing devil's advocate, like one could understand like a lot of the apprehension from like local officials, from local residents, and be like, oh man, it's like who do I really trust? And again, sometimes it's all just about, it boils down to just that first initial impression, right? That how well branded you are and your organization. Like, do you look put together? If you don't look put together, all of a sudden, like, all of these other thoughts enter people's minds, like, oh man, can I really trust this individual? Are they really doing the right thing? Are they just looking to take advantage of the situation? Because again, like, emotions are high, right? Like sometimes people's businesses get totally destroyed. Other times it's their homes and all of their, lifelong, memories that were in that home destroyed. And, here you are, quote unquote, helping out the community. And of course we are, but on the flip side of the scenario, we're also there to make a profit, right? Sure. So all of a sudden they forget about the Good Samaritan aspect of it. And then they start getting a little paranoid and they're like, hey, well, wait, hold on. Are you just looking to take advantage of me? Like, and kick me while I'm down. So, and again, the presence on how you show up and the professionalism, that totally changes that perception, and it can go ahead and kind of, put you in a position to where you can gain some number one, some trust, and then ultimately some additional business. Which, talking of business, a lot of people don't have, a lot of contractors do not have a stronghold on most of these locations, right? They're basically coming from other states, they're coming from other cities, wherever, and they're responding to that situation. That means that typically there's not a huge network that they have. How does one, or what recommendations would you give as far as immediately building a network, building relationships with other contractors? Like, how do you typically go about doing that in a new location?
Social media. It's just social media at this point. And then if you've been in the business a long time, like some of us have, you have contacts. You might not have seen them since the last storm or 3 or 4 storms, but you've worked with them for many years. So you reach out to people, but the time to reach out is not when you're here. The time to reach out and form these social bonds, if you will, these contacts, is in a non-storm time. That's when you need to make these things happen. Simply because there's a friend of mine who says we don't shake hands on the rubble. And so I think that's a really good statement. In the middle of all that chaos is not time to begin to try to form a relationship. So before the chaos, or even after the chaos, keep in touch with people that you've done business with that you feel good about. Don't be afraid to ask them, is there a way that you would recommend me to the other people? Now, in my case, I'm a third party. And so you touched on something about that a moment ago when you said people feel like, well, are they here to help us? Or, the Good Samaritan aspect goes away with the fear. Well, my suggestion on that, especially for remediation and mitigation contractors, is have a third party involved. As a third party, it's an interesting thing. Basically, what happens is the mitigation restoration contractors sell some of their liability to a company like mine, but the customer pays for it. So it's a sweet deal all around. They sell their liability. A company like ours comes in as a third party who is there for the customer, who gives them a modicum of ease in that they're going to be the ones who write the scope. They're going to be the ones who does the testing and who decides what should and shouldn't be removed. And then the contractor is just going to simply follow that, using his or her experience in every way, of course. And that really puts people's mind at ease.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I think not a lot of, or not as much happens as it should happen in these kind of storm style situations, right? Typically you just see, customer signs on the line, restoration contractor walks in, does everything that they need to do, and then they ask questions later, they get documentation later, they get all of the data after the fact. And that kind of causes, not only does it cause tension sometimes with the customer, but it also sometimes causes tensions with the insurance companies in and of themselves, right? So kind of switching gears a little bit. You are currently out on the west coast of Florida. You've been there for a while. Off camera, we were talking a little bit about the uniqueness of the situation. Again, being in Florida, it's only a 2.5-hour drive for me. I was out there several times and I witnessed firsthand this mass exodus of contractors, right? And we're talking pretty decent sized fleets that came in, and immediately within a couple of weeks, they were out of Dodge, right? And we were talking about and hypothesizing about, a couple of scenarios as to why that is. And I'd definitely like to get your opinion on some of that. But before we do that, let's just take a quick second and thank our sponsors. Hey, real quick, are you a restoration pro looking to hire top talent inside of our industry? We all know that labor shortages are real, but I may have a solution for you, okay? And that is Wylander. Why? Well, very simple. They are the go-to recruiting company inside of the restoration arena. Well, the reason I say that is very simple. They've got proofs in the pudding. They've got over 1,000 placements in all 50 states, plus Canada. And what that means is that they not only have the expertise, but more importantly, they have the connections to find that top industry talent that you and your team are looking for. So stop wasting time. Stop sifting through tons and tons of resumes and just conducting endless interviews. Let Wylander do the heavy lifting for you and help you find that right person to help your company succeed. Call Wylander today and start building that dream team inside of the restoration arena. Dominators, let's face it, your company will make it or break it on the backs of your estimating team. But if we're honest here for a second, what tools have you actually given them to succeed? The Actionable Profile is the newest tool inside of your estimator's toolbox, or at the very least, it should be. The Actionable Xactimate Profile is a data-driven solution that provides real-time estimating guidance on the fly. It checks for both overages, omissions in your estimates in real time, leading your team to having much more accurate scopes each and every single time that they're writing an estimate. Avoid any kind of potential conflicts with the adjuster and ensure that your estimates include every single warranted line item with the Actionable Xactimate Profile. Get your free demo today. If you head on over to value.getinsights.org/dominate, we've got an amazing offer for you. Again, head on over to value.getinsights.org/dominate and get your free demo today. Hey, Dominators, I want to talk to you about Impartial and how Impartial creates timely and accurate estimates for faster and fairer claims settlements. Impartial's intelligent toolkit leverages Matterport's 3D scanning technology to automatically generate mitigation and repair estimates. And with Impartial Scope, you can extract relevant data that's embedded within the pre-mitigation and the post-mitigation scans and generate objectively accurate Xactimate or Symbility estimates. Remove the administrative burden and finally accelerate your claims approvals with Impartial today. Dominators, never fill out another claim packet yourself or wait on hold for what seems sometimes to be hours on end to try to get a hold of a lost draft mortgage representative again. Surety was actually purpose-built to keep insurance proceeds flowing to vetted restoration contractors just like you, to relieve cash flow crunch and to reduce a lot of the common administrative burdens that happens when there's a mortgage company involved. So get paid for the work that you've done, get paid faster, get paid with a lot less effort, because listen, at the end of the day, it's your money. So if you want to go ahead and check out Surety, which I would strongly recommend that you do, head on over to your.surety.com/dominate. Again, that's your.surety.com/dominate. We got a really special offer for you. You'll be thankful you did. Hey guys, let me ask you a quick question. Do you want to get paid faster and collect more on your insurance invoices? Then listen, look no further than One Claim Solutions. OCS is an insurance billing specialist that works with adjuster on behalf of people just like us, restoration contractors, to accelerate our receivables cycle and, more importantly, increase our overall collections. Contractors that work with One Claim get their invoices paid on average in around 32 days. And in most cases, actually see an increase in the collections that more than offset the price of the service. So in a lot of ways, this makes OCS effectively free. And that's even before you start to count in the overhead savings that's tied to billing and all of the other administrative burdens that go along with that. So I tell you what, let One Claim Solutions deal with carriers so that you can spend more time on what matters most, which is running your business. Get your free consultation today. Head on over to oneclaimsolution.com/dominate. Once again, that is oneclaimsolution.com/dominate. All right, guys. So we're back more on the casual side of the conversation. You know, Ken, you're out on the West Coast and we're talking about, you know, what you've seen, boots on the ground, because you've been there for quite some time at this point, right?
Yes, I have since about a week after the storm.
Right. So you're basically like a native now. So, So again, and you probably saw a lot of the same things that I saw, right? Even a week after the storm, which is right around actually the time that I decided to go out. I remember you could drive through certain areas and you wouldn't even see like another restoration truck for a while, right? Like it wasn't inundated yet. Like we didn't have that many restoration contractors that were there yet. Shortly thereafter, we saw this mad flood of much needed restoration contractors, right? Because the disaster from this hurricane was massive. I mean, it just spanned what seemed like forever. However, fast forward from there a couple of weeks, right? Or maybe a month or so, all of a sudden we started seeing a mass exodus of these contractors. And I've had lots of conversation with contractors that have called me that are, you know, trying to figure out like what's going on. And, you know, I didn't really quite have an answer for that. And I wasn't sure if it was just a geographical issue, if it was a governmental issue, if they were having too much pushback with insurance companies. Like, what do you see happened, you know, on this particular storm? And I guess we can parlay that with two main part questions, right? What can we learn from this in the event of another situation similar to it, and or what could contractors have done better in order to have been prepared for the landscape that happened in Florida?
Okay, so we'll take that one at a time. I think the big mistake that was made by several of the larger contractors is they came in assuming this would be like every other storm, and they brought manpower, which costs you, daily. You need to feed your folks, and you need to put them somewhere. And without a job in about a month, that became untenable. I think that the more wise and seasoned mitigators, restorers come in with a sales team and themselves, and they make sure that they have an anchor job somewhere and that they have a place to set up, lay down yard, if you will, if they need that, and then bring their people in afterwards. Um, this first in, first on, I must be there, it doesn't always pay out. I knew people in Texas, this is not the last flood, but the other one a couple of years ago, who showed up in mass with all their trailers and all their people, and in 2 weeks they were gone. That they just they didn't couldn't overcome the curve of the cost that they were incurring and the jobs that they were picking up. So that's one thing. Secondly, as you know, we've had several insurance companies fail in this particular storm, and that's caused quite an issue. Then the others that have not failed, they are slow paying, at least in my estimation, more than I've ever seen before. I don't know why that is, but I do know that I always hear from customers, whether they're commercial or residential, we haven't received a penny yet. We haven't received a dime. And what are we now? Almost 6 months after the storm. So there's that. And then the third thing is, our state CFO got on the TV and told everyone to not trust contractors or PAs, and that they would be happy to help the people. I don't know that that worked out for them, but I do know that a lot of people were hesitant after that announcement. So there's those three things.
Yeah, and so kind of taking it to the next level, right? Learning from this kind of a situation, like what should people, again, in the name of being self-contained, right? I think that education and knowledge and experience should be part of that whole aspect of being self-contained and just kind of being prepared, right? In all aspects, not just the material aspects, but also some of the contingencies that one needs to consider, right? How does one take like what's going on now and what happened and then kind of apply it to the next situation so that way they don't have that much of a surprise?
The first thing I would say is keep in mind that all storms are different. When you've been in it a long time, like I have and some of the other people have, you tend to get lazy and think, well, I know what I'm going to do, just like I did last storm and the storm before. The truth of the matter is, in retrospect, every storm is different. There's always going to be something that happens that's unexpected. So have a plan B. Be frugal when you come into a storm with your supplies and with your time. Make sure that you have the ability to communicate with the people that are in even locally in your sales staff, whatever that may take, if you need to buy burner phones or whatever the case may be. The bottom line is we're here to help people and make revenue. And so if we're not careful, we tend to get lazy and just realize in our own self, well, this is just like every other storm. I'll pop a couple of whatever thousands of dollars that I'm used to making, and then I'll go on home. Well, that's not the way it always works. Actually, if you're careful, you'll learn something every storm. One of the things I personally learned this storm is sometimes it's going to slow play. I've had whole weeks with, I won't say nothing to do, but doing things I wasn't expecting to. Normally in a storm of this size, I'm 300 projects in a couple of months. That hasn't happened with us. It hasn't happened with anyone that I know of, but the
Right.
work's still out there. So now we've had to adapt, cut down our workforce, and begin to work some of these larger commercial projects that will be available in a month or two, but you just can't make them happen. So there's an adaptation right there.
Yeah, and it always seems to be the story in business, right? It's you can't be rigid. You have to have a little bit of flexibility and adapt to the current situation. I mean, again, this was one of those unique situations for me where I saw a lot of people coming in and then all of a sudden just getting right out. And most other storm, and again, I do think that this was kind of like this perfect storm, no pun intended, type of situation where, we did have insurance companies that were going into receivership. We did have, like you said, the state CFO, kind of said, hey, be really, really cautious. And also that older community that, is out west in Florida. The other thing, which I don't know if you mentioned it while we were live or while we were off, how many absentee homeowners there are, right?
Yeah,
So there's a lot of properties. People don't even live there. I mean, this is their vacation home. And what did you say off camera, that some of these places don't even look like they've been opened up? They haven't been looked at.
they don't even have blue tarps on them. Some of them are sitting there with shingle roofs or tile roofs ripped off. And I'm not saying down to down to the interior of the attic, but what I am saying is the roof covering's gone, so it's leaking.
Yeah,
It's just,
100%.
and then there are other issues, and that is this is a flood event for most people,
Mm-hmm.
and so you have to have your meters replaced, your electric meters. My understanding is those things are somewhere around 14 weeks out right now, so you
Right.
can't even power these houses back up, the ones that are next to the water that didn't get totally destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, supplies and everything else. Like, there's been this whole situation that I think is a great wake up call for a lot of contractors, right? But especially for those that are really looking to do like full scale restoration, right? I'm talking about like beginning to end, from like the mitigation to mold if they need to then also the reconstruction. But even a lot of the guys that I know have had trouble is even with something as simple as just tarping. Right. Generally speaking, if there is an emergency situation like this, you've got tarps, you go out, you tarp, and relatively quickly. Everything else, as far as the project is concerned, they will, delay, and it'll take time for you to go ahead and get funds. But usually when you're like hurricane, certain area, send out an invoice, you would get paid rather quickly. And there are still people that are waiting, sitting, just waiting to get paid on tarps, right? Which typically, as a general rule, that's like the first amount of money. Like, nobody usually contests that. It's like, okay, there was a hurricane, and I think that there was a lot of homeowners, which I've heard, were literally just talking to adjusters, and the adjuster would be like, oh, no, wait, hold on, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Just let it be. Let's not do anything about it just yet. And it's like, even the homeowners are like, well, wait, hold on, but like, I got a tree that fell through my roof. Like, how am I not going to tarp this? Right. So it's just been a really awkward situation, but it's good to, I think, to kind of look back on it and say, okay, what is it? How could this potentially happen again? And how could I prepare for it a little bit more? Couple of things. What else do you can comes to your mind when it comes down to chasing a storm and being prepared and trying to put yourself in a position to be as profitable as possible, that you think that more contractors should know and should be aware of outside of what we've already covered?
So this is going to sound like a strange answer, but I think that we should carry things like chainsaws.
Mm-hmm.
I think every group should have at least one chainsaw, and the ability to get a tree out of your way. I've been in a position where I was very glad I had a chainsaw. I was going to a fairly large project, and a tree had fell after the storm, and so we just got out and moved it. Had that not happened, we may have been weeks, because you just can't pick up chainsaws just anywhere in the middle of a storm. That's
Right.
one thing. We touched on communication. And then I would say I want to kind of change the subject on that, because I have this on my mind, and that's this. We have to keep in mind about the insurance field adjusters.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guys are real professionals, first of all. My hat's off. They're in the middle of a disaster like we are. So I'm not a person who feels like they're all bad guys. They're not. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of them are inexperienced. You touched on that a moment ago. Well, just let's wait and see, giving bad advice. And I don't think that's on purpose. I don't know. But we have to keep in mind, those of us who are professionals in this business and who do this all the time, that we may be dealing with someone who last week was in Idaho, and he was a car salesman, but he's a temporary insurance adjuster coming down here trying to do a job. And so it's important for us, A, I would say, to give them a little grace. B, not to be pushed around and not let our clients be pushed around by people who don't understand the system. I'm not saying that we should be pushy ourselves. I'm just saying that we shouldn't allow ourselves to be pushed around. We had a situation in this storm where we had a couple of, we'll call them building consultants, that came into a commercial job and walked in as if they owned
I
it.
love the air quotes, by the way, when you said building consultants.
Well, so they came in and immediately began to tell the contractor what he was going to do, the asset owner what he was going to do, and myself what I was going to do. And they got a rude awakening. This particular mitigator was having none of it and understands the rules, and so told them exactly who they were and who they were not, and told them that they weren't the ones that were going to be asking questions, that their boss was standing right in front of them, that was the asset owner, and that we're going to start over.
Mm.
And so there's nothing wrong with that, with being firm and with being direct, because I think that there's probably a school they go to that's called the pushy school of I know everything sometimes. And God bless them, they don't. And neither do we, but we can't let ourselves be run over. So that's one thing I want to talk to you about in regards to uh, how to handle these situations, because it's directly tied to our revenue at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, totally does. Um, you know, mentally, like how should a contractor maybe that hasn't chased storms before, like how should they prepare for those kind of encounters, and how much of that should they be expecting, right? Because it's not all going to be you know you know roses and rainbows when they show up at these disaster sites, right? And like you said, there are a lot of people that are in the field. They're not necessarily bad people, right? They're not there to screw over the homeowner or screw over the contract, but they just may not be prepared, nor do they know or may have as much experience as one does. So how does one like mentally prepare for that? And should they be better versed in standards? Should they be better versed in you know uh, like OSHA guidelines and things like that? Like what makes that situation better, easier, and eliminate as much friction as possible?
Well, those are two different questions. So let's start with what should they know? Anyone in this business that has anything to do with this business that we're in should know the S520 and the 500 like the back of their hand. I'm not saying you're supposed to be able to quote everything chapter and verse, but that basically is the Bible of our business at this point. It's recognized by the insurance companies. So learn the rules, play by the rules, and use them to your advantage. So the rules are in the books. So learn those rules. And if you have someone on your job site that is there as a quote building consultant or whatever the representative from the insurance company, and they want you or instruct you or your asset owner to do something that's against the rules, you should be able to articulate that and say, no, we're not going to do this, or yes, we'll do this, but not the way that you said it, because this is what the book says. So if you can articulate, there's probably no more than 15 or 20 things that come up on a general basis. You can articulate these things and say, even if you say, in this section, then you'll have that on record. Speaking of record, every single encounter should be recorded. And I don't necessarily mean audio recording, because that's up to the person and also whatever law may be in place in this case. But you need to follow every encounter with an email saying, here's what we discussed. Here's what you said. Here's what I said. Here's what the asset owner said. Send that to them. Send that to your admin. Send that to the insurance company. Later, that will do you a great service. Document, document, document. So if you've been instructed by someone to do something that's going to harm the asset owner or the building itself, then you need to document that. And I say, that's fine. Would you please put that in an email to me? If they say no, then they know that they're not supposed to say that. If they say yes, that's even better. But either way, I'm going to put it in an email.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is like something that I think, as far as documentation is concerned, as far as covering your own rear end, I think that a lot of times what happens is that we get so used to doing the day-to-day, like it's like, hey, we've done this a million times locally, and sometimes locally you can kind of lax a little bit, right? Because it's not that same type of a situation. But if you take that same mindset, that same those quote unquote bad habits, if you will, into a disaster situation, like that could be the difference between profitability and taking a loss, and or just taking forever to get paid on these types of projects. So really taking the time to document not only the job site itself, right, with photos and video and your Matterport scans and all of this other stuff, but also the conversations. Like that's the one aspect that I feel like a lot of people do miss, right? Like it's very casual. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, you said this, I believe this guy, he seems like a really cool guy, but hey, Can you put that in an email or reiterate the email, right? Just in case, like, hey, pleasure meeting you, whatever. This is what we discussed. Boom, 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 boom. Send it out. And now a couple of things. Number one, you're holding them accountable to what they said. That's first off. And then secondly, if you're handling 150 projects, you're not going to remember 150 separate conversations, right? Or however many conversations you have per project. So even for yourself, it's like this great way to keep everything organized. And I feel like in disaster situations, a lot of people just kind of lax on that because they're like, oh, my memory is good. And you're also, moving and hustling so fast that you're like, well, yeah, I'll get to it later, right?
Yeah, and you never do.
And you
That's
never
one
do.
of the reasons I carry an iPad. I love the program Good Notes. There's a lot of different ones out there, but that allows me to start a new book, if you will, for each
Mm-hmm.
project. And using an iPad, you can write on the iPad and it'll convert it to text for you. So that's perfect. And then you just, as you walk away, blah, jot, jot, jot. Here's what they said. Here's what I said. Close it up. You're done. Next time you get to that project or the next time you send emails, you open that up and there are your notes. So yeah, that's very, very important. We had a set of once again building consultants on a commercial project, and Ian walk in and say, "Take all of this drying equipment." Well, why? Well, take it
Right.
all out. We just want you to rip everything down. Well, that's we're in a stabilization phase. That's not the right way to do it. Well, anyway, the bottom line is, so they did tell the mitigation guy to take it out. He did. We were hired by the asset owner to monitor the building. In 2 days, we had a spike in RH, GPP, and temperature because the ACs weren't working well either. And so we overrode that particular thing and said, no, we see bad things coming. We're about to have a mold fest here. So put all the equipment back in. And as a third party, that's one of the calls you can make. If the contractor makes that call, it sounds like he just wants to have dollars for his fan or whatever the case is running. If the third party makes that call, it's harder for the insurance company to argue. And of course, we document. Everything goes into spreadsheets and goes into graphs so that later we can prove, why we made that decision. So that's one of the weird incidences that happens in a storm.
I love it. So we're kind of wrapping up here. So, and there's obviously, so much more that we could potentially cover with regards to preparedness and how to, be as profitable and as effective. But one thing that I did want to talk about was planting a flag and how potentially companies, if you're organized properly, how you can take advantage to some degree of these disaster situations to kind of expand your overall footprint. Talk to us about that. How should they look at this opportunity outside of just being in and out? How should they look at it as far as an opportunity to expand their overall footprint for their company?
Well, it's a golden opportunity handled correctly. You're in the middle of more work than you can handle, so your cash flow is going to be good. You're going to be making relationships with local officials, business owners, asset owners of all kinds. So you have this immediate open book of people that you have in your Rolodex, if you will. And so there's always the storm after the storm, which is the homes we talked about earlier that don't get looked at and dealt with. They're going to turn into a science experiment. And so that will be needed. And, that's a waiting game. And so I'll give you an example with back to Hurricane Michael. 2 years after Michael, we were still working on homes that had been either not done properly, and someone said they did it and they didn't, or they just weren't touched at all. So the storm after the storm is another business opportunity. In regards to planting a flag, if you're doing this right, you're going to do it anyway. You're going to have some local base of operations, and turning that over to a brick and mortar or whatever the case may be, your business model shouldn't be that hard. Once you've got your admin staff in a different place, so they're still functioning properly. And there's always I see a lot of people that do this. They'll buy a damaged building because there will be a lot of damaged buildings. They'll get it at a premium, or they'll agree to remediate the damaged building for a lesser rent. And then they'll have a way to actually set up shop. So that's good business, if you ask me. It's our habit. We have offices in Louisiana and Mississippi, Panama City, and now down here in Fort Myers. And it's an easy transition. And you wouldn't be able to do this. It's like having wind at your back. You wouldn't be able to do this as easily in a normal situation. So with the wind at your back, why not take advantage of it?
I love it. Right. And this is like one of the things that we're talking about off camera is, how big of an opportunity it actually is. If you're already going to be dispatching, if you're already going to be out there, this is a great, and you're going to be shaking hands. You're going to be in the community. I would say, and for a lot of these areas, this is not going to be the last time that it's going to have some kind of a disaster type of situation. It may not happen the following year. It might be 5-8 years from now, but what a great time to go ahead and make those relationships and then just kind of, plant a flag in the ground and be like, all right, great. Here we have another location that we can serve an additional community that normally you wouldn't have broken into under any other circumstances because you didn't have that surplus of work, right? Now with that, that's obviously a double-edged sword, right? Make sure that the relationships that you're building are good enough and are and that you do have, after everything is said and done, that you are going to have enough to go ahead and carry you over long term. And that's obviously a different business decision for every business owner, but there really is no better time to start building the relationships and expanding your business empire as these storms and as these disaster situations take place. So Ken, if people want to learn more about you, if they're currently out in the West Coast of Florida and they're like, man, you know what, I could really use this guy's service, how would they get in contact with you? Where would they learn more about you?
So you can go to goeta.app, goeta, environmental testing and assessment, goeta.app, or you could call me at my phone number, which is 850-348-3429.
Perfect. And all those Dominators out there, I will have the links and the phone numbers in the video description below, as well as in the show notes for your easy access. And remember, guys, like, this is an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity not only to learn on the things not to do, right? Learn from other people's mistakes. This is also an opportunity for when we're presented with these storms and these disaster situations to, really expand your business. But it has to be done in the right way. And that's why you always want to go ahead and learn from some of the people that have done this over and over again, guys just like Ken Siders. And Ken, thank you so much, man, for taking the time out of your day to join us here today, share your knowledge with us, and definitely make sure that Dominators out there, that you check out Ken. Again, make sure you shoot him a call. There's going to be a lot of work that's still out there. There's going to be a lot of you restoration contractors that are still going to need, good quality third-party services. So again, Ken might just be your guys. And as always, hustle, hack, dominate. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
You've been listening to Restoration Domination, your #1 resource for tips, tricks, and hacks to help your business grow. Subscribe to our channel and follow us for more Restoration Domination. And follow our host at Rico Garcia Jr. on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Till next time, this is Restoration Domination. Hustle, hack, dominate.